Now that's an interesting concept, even to me. I remember, I must have been 16, 18 years old, 40 years ago. I saw something on television, and it was just thrown in there with no explanation, but it was like a scientific show, and someone said, it was about time and stuff, it said, time is a location. And I thought about that, and it hit me, a location? How can time, this nebulous whatever, be a location? And then I said, yes, of course. And then I added the word geographical. Time is a geographical location. What do you mean? It's some place out there on some location? No, it's a location of anything with respect to where it was before or will be after. So it could be the earth turning on its axis, the earth revolving around the sun, okay? The moon, phases of the moon, or it could be the position of a proton or a neutron circling the nucleus of an atom. It's changing one location to another location, of course very rapidly, and that changing of location is time. So it's actually a place, a position. Okay, so that made sense to me, that time could only be when things moved. So his thing is, if you made everything immobile, he says, well, there could still be time, but there'd be no way to measure it. So I thought about that this morning, and I thought, I have a watch that doesn't work. Well, it would work, it's just that the battery's dead. Now this watch works, the one I'm wearing. You can see it. You can see the second hand changing position. That's time going by, second by second. But this watch, you look at the second hand, and it doesn't move. This is a timepiece. This measures time, but it's frozen. So therefore, this frozen watch is proof that there is no time. All right, that's just one timepiece. All right, let's freeze all the watches in the world. Has time now ended? No, because we have, the earth is still turning. The moon is still moving. The earth is going around the sun. The sky is changing, right? Okay, let's stop it all. Everybody stop. No moving. Now do we have time? Well, now's where the argument comes in. No. Most of these would argue no, there's no time now because there's no way to measure it. But let's ask ourselves, suppose we're out in the wilderness and the only timepiece we have, and it's dark at night. So we can't see the rotation of the sun or the earth, it's just dark. Hour after hour, although there is no hour because you don't see any motion. But it's dark. But we got this watch that doesn't work. Okay. Is time going by? No. Look at the heavens. Can't see no heavens. It's dark. Cloudy and dark. Is time going by? Who would say no? Of course time is going by. Just because you don't have an instrument in front of you to measure a certain rhythm of time doesn't mean there isn't any. Okay? All right, let's continue. Presumably, to such thinkers, beginning of temporal events or series of events would not entail a beginning of time itself. On the other hand, those who adhere to relational view of time generally take the beginning of events to be synonymous with the beginning of time itself. Schwartz says, according to the relational theory, the passage of time consists in the beginning in the happening of events. So the question whether time is finite or infinite may be deduced to the question whether a series of events is finite or infinite. Well, how can a series be infinite? I mean, once one of the series goes by, then you start another one, that one is finished. It can't be infinite. Again, a stupid proposition. It might be asserted that even on the relational view of time, there can be time prior to the first event, because one may abstract from the individual event to consider the whole universe as a sort of event which occurs at its creation. There would thus be a before and an after with respect to this event, whether there's a universe or no universe. On the other hand, the level of abstraction may be illegitimate and may presuppose a time above time. Then it just goes into a tangle of, you know. But can you see the arguments? To have time, you must have a creation, you must have things, you must have movements, you must have changing of positionings, the sun, the moon, the stars, the earth. You must have that, because without that, there is no time. And before God created all that, guess what? There couldn't have been time. So there was no time before the creation. There will be no time when the human family enters the family of God. Okay? If there was nothing at all, not even space, then it would certainly seem to be true that there was no time. What are they leaving out of that? If there was nothing at all. When was there ever nothing at all? Did we forget about God? Right. It's kind of like that, what do you call it, that colloquialism or whatever, or I don't know, saying. If a tree falls in the forest and there's no one there to hear it, does it make noise? What's the answer?
Yes.
How so?
Still made noise.
Huh?
It still made noise. It still happened. The event happened. Whether anyone witnessed it or not.
Right, because you've already stated that it happened. You did say the tree fell. So just because there was nobody there to hear it, or nobody had a pocket watch, or had one that worked, doesn't mean that everything else falls by the wayside. Because we know that when a tree falls and hits the ground, it produces vibration, which is noise. That is the law of science. So if we state emphatically that the tree did fall, but nobody was there to hear it, it still made noise. Okay? Now, here's where we get a little interesting part. When the first event occurred, the first moment of time began. The first event. Huh? Then, of course, I put a little note here. Was that event physical or spiritual? Because an event can be either. These are difficult conundrums, and at least open to question as to whether the beginning of events necessitates the beginning of time. Therefore, we need to ask whether is it an absurdity in supposing that time had a beginning. Some philosophers have argued that time cannot have a beginning because every instant of time implies a prior instant. Thus, there could be no first instant of time. Within a Newtonian understanding of time, this argument, even if valid, would only imply that the universe had a beginning in time instead of with time. But in fact, it does seem plausible to contend on a relational view of time that a first instance could exist, since apart from events, no time exists. Stuart Hackett argues, time is merely a relation among objects that are apprehended in an order of succession, or that the objects exist in such an order. Time is a form of perceptual experience and of objective process. in the external to the mind world. Thus the fact that time is a relation among objects or experiences of a successive character voids the objection that the beginning of the world implies an antecedent void time, for time such a relation of succession among experiences or objective processes has no existence whatsoever apart from these experiences, processes themselves. Now, here's what I want to draw your attention to. We have events, objects, experiences, processes. Some of these are not materialistic objects. They're subjective thoughts, and but they use all of these things. So I'm going to use this example. Well, what did the Scriptures say? Did the Scriptures actually say anything about this? And if they do, how come all these people missed it for 2,000 years? Well, they have not all missed it. I mean, Newton, he believed that, yes, time did exist. But again, you won't find one Scripture in here to back it up. And that's where I'm at, when I'm going to talk about theological things and biblical things. What do the Scriptures say? Is there anything in the Scripture to back it up? And that's where I found this thing, that God showed me about what happened before the creation. Is there anything in the Scriptures that talk about something that happened before the creation of the universe? Yes, there is. Yes, there is. Therefore, if nothing existed, and then something existed, there is no absurdity in speaking of this as the first moment of time. Meaning time can only be when the existence of things comes into being. But Ellis draws a very instructive analogy between this sort of speech and the talk of temperatures below absolute zero. When a physicist says there is no temperature lower than absolute zero, the use of lower then does not presuppose there actually are such temperatures, but only that we can conceive them in our minds. Okay? In the same way, to say there was a time when the universe did not exist, but does not imply there was such a time. Did you get it? In the same way, to say there was a time when the universe did not exist does not imply that there actually was such a time, but only that we can mentally conceive of such a time. To say there is no time before the first event is like saying there is no temperature minus 273 degrees Celsius. Both express limits beyond which only the mind can travel. Now, I know there's a lot of words in there, but immediately a big contradiction pops out to me. First he says, but we can conceive this idea in our minds. Then he says, both express limits beyond which our mind can travel. You can only conceive it in your mind 2 sentences later, but it's beyond what your mind can comprehend. That's what we call a contradiction. And I've learned to spot these things, like a meteorite shower in the night. I mean, it's just boom, there it is. If time exists with events, then an origin of time merely implies the beginning of the universe. The first moment of time is not a self-contradictory concept. Well, maybe it is. Maybe it is. We're almost finished with this. Then we're going to get into some scriptures and so on. Thus, a Newtonian view of time, the universe arises in an absolute, undifferentiated time, while a relational view of time, it comes into existence with time. But of course, prior to creation was not simply nothing, but God. Now, you just bring that in, say. So I'm saying that you don't want to shortchange this guy, because he does try to cover all the bases, even though he doesn't really understand it. Would his existence necessitate the presence of time prior to creation? Well, Mr. Lucas argues that as a personal God could not be timeless, and that if God is eternal, then time must be infinite as well. But Hackett argues convincingly, he said they're both convincing, and they contradict each other.